And you know what the punchline of this one is, Jeff, is that, again, it's paper. What are these things but paper, promises to pay 3 years, 5 years, 30 years out?
And, I mean, this is the thing. It's a total fantasy land. Wiesenthal used this chart where he showed a trend with the supply for Treasuries ramping up exponentially along with the price of Treasuries. And, of course, the implication was is that it's normal for price and supply to advance together when, of course, that's, an ultimate fundamental contradiction of any market. And then, of course, what I simply did was extend that to, where we already are, basically, which is the 0% boundary. And, if that trend continues any further, then literally the bond buyers are going to be paying the U.S. government for the privilege of lending money to an insolvent debtor. You literally cannot get any further insane than that in the realm of finance. One thing that hasn't been covered is this ludicrous Operation Twist.
Yeah.
And of course, what's such a joke here is that, we're told that the Federal Reserve isn't going to be adding to its holdings of treasuries because it's going to sell its short-term treasuries and buy its long-term treasuries. Well, of course, we're obviously getting into exactly the same thing which we just talked about in our clip. There's nobody to buy any of these treasuries, period. So, who are they selling the short-term treasuries to? Well, of course, they're just selling them to themselves. So, they're selling short-term treasuries to themselves, buying, long-term treasuries, and, Ben Bernanke just keeps counterfeiting money off of its printing press.
No, that's right. If you had a neighbor that behaved this way, who always constantly lied to you, and you knew that their home was in foreclosure, and you knew that they'd been laid off from their job, but they kept getting new boats and new cars and new jet skis all the time, would you trust this person? Would you loan them money? I mean, and that's the bottom line, Jeff, is China. China's not buying it anymore. I mean, the creditors, the once would-be creditors of this nation are no longer buying it.
No, the European nations have been devastated. China has stopped buying from the U.S. government. They're still accumulating treasuries, but it's being done via their currency swaps. So when you hear about China, doing currency swaps with all these other countries, what they're doing is draining the swamp. They're taking some of this U.S. paper off of these other countries' hands, slipping them renminbi so that they can engage in two-way trade in renminbi. And so, their total holdings of treasuries actually have continued to increase, but they're no longer doing any direct buying from the U.S. government. And so, this still leaves us with this massive funding question. There's nobody at all to buy these treasuries. There's all sorts of people that want to sell them because they know the U.S. dollar is being phased out as reserve currency. And, I'm still waiting for anybody to offer even any semi-plausible theory on how all this supply could be soaked up.
Well, in the meantime, for those of us with the eyes to see and the ears to hear, we'll just keep buying physical precious metals, unencumbered assets, with no counterparty risk. At the end of the day, we'll be the only ones standing. I mean, the banks themselves don't even have it in the vaults, Jeff.
And that one phrase, no counterparty risk, is what it's all about. You hold bullion. Your own wealth is protected to the absolute maximum possible extent. It's in your own possession, and no one else's criminal act can detract from that wealth. Whereas any time you allow your wealth to be held in any form of paper instrument, then ultimately the wealth is in the custody of somebody else, and your financial future is in their hands.
Yes, no criminality can affect your investment when you own it in physical form. It's in your hands. I think that's important to hit on, Jeff, because you just mentioned to me as we got rolling here a Reuters article in which the bankers themselves are apparently saying they thought fraud was just part of doing business. Can you tell people about that?
1/4 of the Wall Street bankers surveyed, 500 Wall Street executives, both said they had observed criminal acts and that they thought that fraud was a part of doing business. And 16% of them openly stated that they would willingly engage in insider trading if they felt sure they could get away with it. And of course, this is a survey. This is just the ones that were willing to confess to this. Who knows how many more, are secretly doing this but didn't want to, divulge this even in a survey.
No further commentary necessary, folks. I mean, that's the paradigm in which we live, Jeff, and it's a paradigm that is now in collapse mode. Let me ask you this before we let you go, Jeff. There was a report that came out recently from Merrill Lynch advising its high-net-worth clients to basically adjust their portfolios for a new global paradigm. Essentially, I think they're sounding the warning bell that this thing is coming apart at the seams. What would you advise people to do who have not taken any steps to prepare, who may be deeply in T-bonds or T-bills who may still be deeply invested in the stock market. As the hour draws near to the collapse of this thing, which is now evident by all these things we've talked about, whether it's hacking of banks, LIBOR scandal, PFG best, banking glitches, the system is clearly unraveling. So my question again is, what would you advise people to do now in order to prepare?
Well, the first thing, of course, is simply to realize that their paper is going to go to zero, and it's going to happen soon. That's a unmistakable trend of history. It's certainly being telegraphed today, and so they have to realize that they have to take action. Once they make that realization, then the next step for them is to ponder their options. And here, the big problem is that we're still facing the possibility of two almost opposite scenarios. There's the debt default crash scenario, which I talk about regularly, where, everything just, implodes as these debtors, begin defaulting like dominoes, and then, the paper just plummets to zero literally and instantly. But the opposite scenario is still a possibility as well, and that's where, to avoid, this bankruptcy debt default scenario, the bankers simply let the printing presses run wild. And in that scenario, the paper also goes to zero, but it does so through our currencies being diluted via hyperinflation. And the problem with these opposite scenarios is that it dramatically limits the things people can do to protect themselves, which will protect them in both scenarios. Myself, I'm also an investor, and, I've been forced to basically almost entirely focus my own holdings in the precious metal sector, either in bullion or in the shares of the miners, which, I still believe are fantastic values at these depressed prices. And, that is what I see as the best vehicle for protecting people from two opposite scenarios.
Jeff, help people understand where they can find you. I know you're at SilverGoldBull now. You're also over at BullionBullsCanada. What are you working on? What's coming next?
There's so much coming out right now that it's almost like I get distracted by something new each day. Today I'm doing a piece which I'm titling "Your Bank Account is No Longer Safe," and it's basically putting all these pieces together and saying, the wall that's separating these thieves from people's ordinary bank accounts is now so thin and so fragile that you really have to immediately take a second look at whether you want any of your funds in any form of bank account, because you could be the next MF Global victim.
Yeah, and we're tired of seeing victims, Jeff. I mean, we know Salente was victimized by MF Global. So were so many others, friends of mine that email me. One in particular, his name is Don. Don, hey, hello to you. Sorry for your loss. He was only able to recover 71% of his money from what he had in MF Global. And now we see this with PFG Best again, $220 million missing. It's just, the shoes keep dropping, and we just want people to ultimately protect themselves. Jeff, we post all your material over at SGT Report. Tell people where they can find you on the net as well.
You can see my stuff either at BullionBullsCanada.com or my new home, which is SilverGoldBull.com, and our SilverGoldBull blog.
Okay, Jeff. Well, thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate it, and let's make sure we're touching base a little bit more often. It's been too long.
Sounds great, and it was a pleasure to be here again.
All right, Jeff Nielson of SilverGoldBull.com and BullionBullsCanada. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Sean.
See you, Jeff.
Well, that's it, guys. Much more to come. Thanks for tuning in, and visit sgtreport.com for all the latest. Good night.